Hello, I am Fredonia Ward Robinson. I'd like to tell you a little bit about my life. I was born in January, in the year of 1880 in Abbeville, Alabama. This is a picture of my mother Rebecca Ward. My father was Robert Culver, but I don't have a photo of him. Beck and Bob had 7 children. 4 daughters and 3 sons. I am the oldest, Fredonia Ward. I married Reverend William B. Robinson. My 3 sisters are Laura Ward, who married Leondis Bryant. Lola Ward, who married Richard Nain Durr. Estelle Ward, who married Lemuel Glover. My 3 brothers are Marion Ward, Robert Culver, and Will C. Ward. This is a family picture of all of us looks like after church. The year was 1910 and the place was Abbeville, Alabama. In this photo is my mother, siblings, husband, children, nieces, nephews and close family. One big happy family. First row left to right. Vanilla Bryant, Carrie Lee Robinson, Eva Bryant, Joe Bryant, Willie B. Robinson, Annie Durr. Second row left to right. Estelle Glover, Versie Durr, Laura Bryant, holding Rosa Bryant, Lola Durr holding looks like Richard Durr. Becky Teague Ward Culver holding Maudry T. Durr. Fredonia Ward Robinson, William B. Robinson Sr. holding William Robinson Jr. Third row, left to right. I don't know the first person, then Marion Ward, and I don't know the last 3 people. Fourth row left to right. I don't know the first 3 people, then the fourth is Robert, Bud, Culver. Fifth row left to right. I don't know the first 3 people, then Leondis Bryant. I don't know who was after him, then it's Will C. Ward. On June 16, 1904, I married William B. Robinson in Union Springs, Alabama. He was a lot older than me. He was about the same age as my mother Becky Ward. William's occupation was a traveling Methodist minister. He was from the African Methodist Episcopal religion. We were married about 8 years before my passing. When I passed, my children were going back and forth between Alabama and Florida, staying with different family members. Eventually, all the children ended up in Florida. Years later, after the children were grown and on their own, he ended up in Florida, owning 30 acres of land and a restaurant near the railroad. Our oldest daughter Willie B. even worked in the restaurant for him. Do you know he wouldn't let her collect her own paycheck? He did divide the land up between our children before passing, but somehow 3 out of my 4 children lost their land. He also married again, but I don't know much about that. An interesting folklore about William. It was said that he had buried a treasure and put a hex on it, and only one person would be able to find it, and only during the night. As far as the family knows, no one's ever found it. He has some quirky sayings, like a man that had shiny breeches meant he was lazy because that means he was sitting down all the time. And if a man came to the door and didn't take his hat off before he entered in the house, he would knock them out the house, because he thought that was very disrespectful. This is us on our wedding day. Me in my wedding dress, looking beautiful. William and I had 4 children. I was about 25 when I had my first child. My oldest daughter Willie B. was born in 1905. Next was Carrie Lee, born in 1907. Then came William B. Jr., born in 1908. Then there was Sugar Precious, born in 1909, but we lost her at the age of 3 to malaria. And last was Blanton Parks, born in 1913. This is my oldest Willie B. She was about 7 years old when I passed, and it was really rough on her, being the oldest of 4 children, with no mother, and a father that traveled all the time, leaving her and her siblings with different family members. Because William traveled all the time, he agreed to let her get married at the age of 13 to a man named Claudy that was 10 years her senior. The marriage didn't last long though, and her grandmother and aunts came to get her and take her away from there. Willie always made sure to take care and watch out for all of her siblings and her siblings' children. She knew how hard it was losing your mother at a young age. She had a saying, a motherless child sees a hard time. About 1922 Willie B. fell in love and married Thomas McTaw, and a year or so later she had her first son Thomas Jr. A couple of years later, she became a widow. She later joined a holiness church in Florida, and not too long after that is when she met her third and last husband James McLeod. They got married in 1930 and had 5 children. This is Carrie Lee, my second child, who married King Solomon Johnson. They had 5 children together, and like me, her mother, she passed at a young age, leaving her children behind to live with different family members. She was about 34 when she passed. She was one who didn't like to discipline her kids, so when they did something she would call for her sister Willie aka Biggie to come discipline her kids for her. Willie also had a nickname for her little sis. She would call Carrie Lee, sister. This is my youngest son, my baby boy. Blanton. Blanton used to work for the Seaboard Air Line Railroad Company in Florida. He married Emma James and had 3 children. And then the last of my children, but not necessarily in the order I spoke. William B. Jr., also known as Uncle Dub, also known as Bill Robinson. He was married twice, first to Bessie Montgomery, and they had 2 children together, and second to Hazel Jones, and they had 4 children together. He was the first one to move to Philadelphia, where he got a great job and even ended up owning his own store. He had nice home and gave his wife everything she could want. He did great for a black person during that time. He worked at Edgecombe Steel for 35 years, and he also worked as a butler for the people who owned Sun Oil Company. Somewhere about 1945, he sent for his big sister Willie B., who was living in Florida at the time, to come up to Philly to live, and that's how those 2 lines of my children ended up in Philadelphia. A long way from Alabama and Florida. Hi Mary. My granddaughter, thanks for passing on your knowledge of family history. Thank you to my great-great-granddaughter Monique for keeping my legacy going and keeping the memories and history of your ancestors alive.